Well, thank you everyone for having us. And
Yeah.
thank you, Sheriff, for everything. And
Yeah, for the lovely introduction. You're too kind. And thanks again to Josh for inviting me and for Natasha for
Yeah.
coming. And to, especially our tech crew who helped a lot in the installation of the show, and everybody else who helped us. Really appreciate all of your help with painting and cleaning. And I'm sorry I don't remember everybody's names, but
the
you
students
know
were
who
very
you
helpful.
are, students out there. Yeah.
So Jennifer and I, as we were getting ready to give you this talk, we were really thinking about making you aware of our individual practices, and as Sheriff was saying, what we do, give you some overview of themes that you'll see in the show, but we're also really interested in talking about collaboration and that process in the experience that we had together. So just with some history, some of you might be interested in working in collaboration. Jen and I both moved to Minneapolis about 6 years ago, where we started teaching at the same college and developed a friendship that just naturally, you're having conversations with your friends, and we naturally came to the realization that we were both very interested in themes around place, what defines place, how place affects social interaction, the physical residue of space, history, etc. So, but what was really interesting is that both Jen and I come at it from a really different angle. I like to think about my practices involving or being centered in storytelling. And Jen, how would you?
Yeah, I'm interested in cues in the physical site that have this kind of subconscious effect on our behavior, our feelings, the way we move through space. All of those kind of invisible mechanisms, whether it's at Walmart or it's in the museum or wherever it may be that we are, that all of our environments are constructed. So there is this kind of social element to that too, and with Natasha, these kind of cues in the environment. So we've been finding places where there's crossover and possibility for that to push our own practices too. So not just within our collaborative efforts, but in our own individual studio practices too.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll start by kind of introducing ourselves a little more, put some images to those
ideas.
Yeah. Do you want to
Sure.
work the computer?
Yeah, so this is a piece that I actually did in Philadelphia. As Sheriff had mentioned, this will be relevant to some of the images you'll see. I am Canadian, moved to Philadelphia, and was actually really surprised at the culture shock I had when I first moved, and how different things were. And after graduate school, I was teaching, but I was also waitressing in a lot of different places. And this image, I'm really interested, again, in how people accommodate the expectations they might experience in their family or in their school or that kind of thing. And this is my friend Sean, who I worked with at this pub, who had started his first year of college and was actually really stressed out about all the change and all the expectations of him on the football team. So to sort of make light of some of the things that he was going through, I made him this jersey, which to see some of the details, you'll see this. So there's a whole bunch of, the piece is called, the overarching title is called I Need a Hero, and there's a lot of different images of knights, medieval knights. And it's sort of interesting medieval culture in terms of how we look at gender. There's, there's a sense of masculinity, but there's also knights that look really feminine, so we were kind of having fun with that. And he had such a kick out of doing this photo shoot that we did, and had actually told his friends about it, and they told him that was just, that was a stupid thing to do. I don't know why you would want to do this project. And he just told them, it made me feel really comfortable with myself. I'm comfortable with myself, so he was able to have a voice. So I'm really interested in using art as a prop or something that can interrupt our habits or ways of seeing and facilitate maybe a conversation through humor. And then these suits are for me. This is my husband dressed up as we were having some issues and thinking about the different things we were encountering in the States that was a little bit alienating for us. So I made these Resident Alien spacesuits, and so this is screen printed on the back. It's an angry beaver, and we've got And we made the suits. I was working at the Fabric Workshop and Museum at the time, which I was really influenced by. And for young people, if you're interested in fibers or art that crosses a lot of disciplines, you should really look at the Fabric Workshop and Museum for, they have a great internship program where you can learn how to print fabric and work with artists. So I was doing that at the time, and this is my friend Wendy, a fellow Canadian. And we just walked down one of the busiest streets in the older part of town. And I just really enjoyed this photo with the family and how they're trying to avoid her gaze. So anyway, yeah, to contextualize the work again, I make these props and things that maybe create another space for us to, think about insecurity and through humor, that kind of thing, your fears.
Okay, so what you're looking at, I just have some images that kind of illustrate what I was talking about a minute ago in terms of looking for these cues in our environment. I guess I'm interested in things that are kind of slippery between definition, both in terms of what they are, and then in terms of how we categorize things and how we've learned to categorize things a certain way. And I look for these things in the architecture or in the environment that are the things that we're not supposed to look at. So we enter any kind of specific space, and there are these codes, there are these rules of behavior, expectations that you have of yourself, and then also expectations of the space. And so this particular project was at the Rochester Art Center in Minnesota. And the building was pretty new. They moved in 2005. And this project took place at the beginning of 2007. And I'm interested in things, for example, that kind of walk that line between accidental and intentional, things that are natural or artificial. And so what you're looking at in this instance, you walk into the art museum, and you're not supposed to look at the floors and the ceilings and even the walls behind the paintings, or any of the fixtures. So this image was left over from, they have a summer kids program, and the kids did like a very colorful vinyl tape drawing on the floor, and it ran around a corner from the elevator to the stairwell, and then when they pulled up the vinyl at the end of the summer, it had eaten away at the floor, at the concrete floor. There was a polish on the floor. So it left this image that I thought was really beautiful and interesting, and this thing that was kind of temporary became permanent. And so then I had them, the space for it's the third floor, it's the Emerging Artist Program, Emerging Minnesota Artist Program, and it's more like a glorified hallway. It's this humongous hallway, there's like almost a 50-foot wall, but then on the other side, there's all these kind of utilitarian things, all the closets, the bathrooms, the water fountain, et cetera, et cetera. So it has this kind of dual role, which again, I'm always looking for, these dual roles or these dual definitions. And so I asked them to make that mini wall on the left to draw attention to its identity as a gallery space, and then it also created that that corner so that I could make the wall drawing of the vinyl floor on the opposite end of the hallway. And then you can see here a detail of the vinyl pattern. And so I used grays because it was the same color that it is already. And so here it is from the end of the hall where the floor was marked. So you're looking at the wall drawing, and then to draw your attention back to the fact that it's this utilitarian space, it's this glorified hallway, I put a red, or it's kind of like safety orange, piece of cardstock on the right-hand side that mirrors the, there it is here, and then it's on the fire extinguisher on the other side. And then they kind of gave me freedom to move throughout the rest of the museum. Usually the exhibition just takes place in this space, but they said that, as long as my work wasn't, intruding on the other work in the museum, I could make some other pieces. So I did my snooping around. Usually in my practice, I start by doing site visits, and I look around, and I always look in all the nooks and crannies in the floor, and all the stairwells and kind of the back areas, the windowsills. And so I'll take a lot of pictures and notes and talk to people and kind of get to know the space. And often my work is geared towards the people who most intimately know that space. So they might be the ones that notice the project, whereas maybe some other people coming into the space who wouldn't notice those things. You guys can hear me okay? Who wouldn't notice those things might not know that it's artwork. They might, again, think it's an accident. They might question what it is. So then here's in another gallery, you can see the number and the letter on the floor that they had marked up when they were making the building, constructing the building. And then they tried to buff it out, and actually, if you look close, there's still some orange spray paint in there. So to draw attention to that, I made a white contact paper ghost image on the wall, and then it's more or less visible or invisible depending on where you're standing and the light during the day. So there's just a detail of one and the other. So again, this is just kind of an example of kind of the basis of my practice, the way that it's kind of developed. I guess when I was in grad school, it started developing down this path, and so these are the things that I'm interested in a general sense. So
you can sure. Yeah. So this image is from our first collaboration. It's called Our Captive Ride, and it was an event that we held over a weekend at the Art Shanty project. Minneapolis is really good about getting people out in the winter. Minneapolis think also they build the kind of a shanty, but they're for karaoke, or there's all these different fun activities to do that. So we proposed an event which was just more than anything, it was a collaboration of great testing for us to begin our idea. So we invited people to, we might have an image of the ball. We invited people to write almost like wishes or statements for things that they wanted to cast out into the universe, if you will, and then people were invited to pick them up, and we had a fishing net, so we kind of made it a performance. Really playful that we put together. What was generated was an understanding that we both had an interest in the idea of hope and promise, or aspirations for something better. We were also interested in, we also discovered that we could collaborate, that we were both very open to the possibilities, to the potential, where, I don't know if anyone would collaborate with practice, but it's actually really hard. When people really are getting Jenny and I are both really reactive to environment and situations, so it almost sounds like I'm like a weird going on that's really, it's kind of exciting. How it sort of actually affected practice. Yeah, and I just want to, I guess, add that for me it was a new experience, A, collaborating, and B, working with the public, because it was an interactive piece. People, kids, adults coming in and writing notes and putting them in the ball. They want to talk to us about what the project was.
So it was kind of couched in this kind of fun event, like the whole 2 or 3 weeks of the art shanties, the ice shanties take place. So it seemed like an opportunity to just experiment and test things both together.
Just going off of that, thinking about collaboration as a learning opportunity. Prior to living in Minneapolis, I was actually working on a lot of arts-based community projects that Sharon mentioned that, often dealt with really topics like urban play or gentrification or even difficult relationships between.
And I was so, when I was in Philadelphia, I was so moved by the disparity of the classes and the poverty that I saw, and I was working with lots of students who are going to be educators working in the Philadelphia Urban School District, and I started actually working in the urban school district myself, doing some art projects, and was becoming aware of how art could be this powerful tool for healing and empowerment. So moving to Minneapolis, that I had this really big shift because I had really devoted my time to community stuff. So this was one community project in Minneapolis, actually, where we made an AIDS awareness mural in North Minneapolis. There was 10 different murals. It was called Sidewalks Saving Lives. And usually, I mean, my practice had really become this facilitating young people to, again, have a forum where they could really talk about issues that were of concern to them. So this is actually a spoken word poem that these girls that I was working with wrote to their peers about, you know, sex and safety and things that they just felt difficult to talk about. And it was really kind of fascinating. I just, as a side note, this project, they seemed really not into it when we first met. So we have lots of meetings, and there's lots of talk and narratives and testimonials and people talking about living with AIDS. And this is a community that just even talking about AIDS is completely taboo. You just don't talk about it. So using art as a tool to do that was really effective. And these girls were just not into it. And I didn't know what to do, like how to engage them. So I just flat out, it probably wasn't appropriate, but I was like, I just asked them, like, do they feel pressured to have sex? Like, let's talk about sex in your class. And they turned off the phones and they wanted to talk about it, and then they wrote this poem, and they were so empowered that I would see them come back and actually bring their friends and other people from the community to go and just talk about the things they were experiencing. So for me, this was a really intense space, and that space between aesthetic work or working in galleries and the street was actually becoming actually really difficult for me. So in moving to Minneapolis, I didn't have this community I was working with. It took me a few years to build relationships and trust, and so working with Jen was a wonderful opportunity to allow myself to feel like it was okay to spend time doing my individual work again, which is actually a really big shift. Like, how do you negotiate that space? And now I feel like I'm starting to bring, I guess, the poetics or even some abstract ideas into some of the workshops I'm doing in the community, which I would love to talk to you about later, maybe in the question period or something. So yeah, so we can just keep.
And I when we did trying to figure out how we were going to frame this talk, because you guys are guinea pigs, we haven't really done this together before. Yeah. So we thought it was really important to talk about, different modes of collaboration. So, Natasha has more experience with kind of like the social, political, community angle. And I just wanted to talk, I think, mostly for students about some of the benefits of working in collaboration, because for me, I have a couple projects that I'll show you here. This is a two-part project that I did with a visiting student from Italy a couple semesters ago. And so for me, collaboration, with Natasha in that first project kind of, opened my eyes to the possibility of bringing change into my own studio practice. So you kind of get into a mode of working, especially when you're outside of school and you don't have someone giving you assignments and kind of pushing your boundaries. And so you get into this practice, which on one hand is great because you kind of know how you work and you know the things that you're interested in and that you want to research and you're drawn to, but then you kind of like get in this cycle or almost a rut, I want to say. And so sometimes it takes working with someone else to make you see things differently. Maybe they use strategies that you wouldn't use. For example, in this one, I won't go into great detail about exactly what the project is, but I was interested in video. Video is still new to me, but I never in a million years would have done something that's more of a performance. So, when I was working with Gaetano, we had all of these different ways of seeing the same idea. We were interested in this idea of this gesture of shoveling the snow up against the window so that it would fill the window, but to each of us it was something different. Was it a performance? Was it a drawing? Was it a video? Was it, what exactly was it? So we ended up, that's me on the right-hand side, so I ended up in this video, which was, I felt terrorized actually being in the video, even though you can't see me because I have my hood on. But I've been trying to use these collaborations and opportunities to push my boundaries in my studio and then even with myself too. So this was an installation at St. Cloud State in Minnesota, and as you can see here, it's a video that's projected from inside the gallery, so you can't actually enter the gallery. We projected it onto the windows, closed the gallery, and then put up the particle board. And you can see in this one that the snow is rising, and it took us about 3 hours to get the snow to the top because it was like minus a billion degrees, so the snow wasn't sticking, but only like 12 minutes to take it down. It was pretty funny. So then here you can see on the other side the wood panel, so you couldn't enter the space. So again, it's another example of a project that's really meant for the people who use this space. You know, the students would, you know, the video is not meant for you to stand there in front of it for 3 hours, but if you're moving through the building throughout the day, you would see it at different points. You would also know that the gallery you usually enter it. Maybe you would also know that the gallery has ugly brown carpeting and a, you know, drop ceiling that's crumbling. And then also the shoveling took place on the back porch, which wouldn't be accessible then. And then part 2 of the project took place at the dressing room gallery in Minneapolis. And again, it's another video. And here we're quite literally kind of like playing out our questions about what this project is. And on the bottom there's a 2-channel projection of us drawing in the snow. And then on the top is this projection. And then you can see here the drawing. You know, and they're not really signs or anything. They were just kind of on the fly. And people wanted to know if they were symbols. And then at the top is a projection of, I don't know if you guys have ever tried this, if it gets cold enough here, but in Minnesota it's really popular to boil water and throw it in the air when it's minus, you know, whatever. And it instantly turns into snow vapor, you know, and it's really beautiful as it kind of floats away. So, you know, that winter, it was really, really cold all winter, so it was all over the news and YouTube, you know, people trying to throw all different kinds of boiled liquids into the air. So I just did it with water, but so I threw the water into the air, and I was trying to videotape it, but it happened so fast, so I ended up slowing it down, and so it almost looks like little like bursts. You can't really see it so well in this image, but so that for me, you know, again, just another angle from which you can kind of examine what collaboration might mean to you guys in terms of your own studio practice. So then the next project that we worked on was at Art of This Gallery, which doesn't exist anymore in Minneapolis, and it's on Nicollet Ave at 35th. And if anybody has been there, you know, there's a strip of shops, and, you know, there's a pub, and now there's a boutique, a secondhand store. But for a long time, almost up until this year, like every 10 minutes, every one of these places was turning over. It's in this weird neighborhood that's kind of along the highway where, for some reason, things don't stick there. It's kind of this, like, neighborhood in between neighborhoods. It's really not any place that you can put your finger on that you could describe. And so we were really interested in that kind of turnover here, and that, you know, often people would put newspaper up in the window if they were moving in or moving out or renovating the space. You know, the owners of the space would often put, you know, some kind of paper up or tarp, and then they would like slap a coat of paint on the place and then put down really cheap plywood on the floor, you know, and paint it. And then it was supposed to be this like, you know, brand spanking new place, and it would have a new identity, a new, you know, person renting it. So we were interested in that. So Natasha printed this newsprint, if you want to describe.
So these are screen printed personal ads. So there's calls for love, there's calls for things that are lost, there's, you know, all different types of want ads and classifieds you can imagine. Really interesting narratives, some of which are found and some of which I made up, which you know, this is a thread that's actually been coming to my work, which will lead into the show that's opening this evening, is this interest in fiction. And I was very moved by our cast when we did Cast at Far, Cast at Wide, just all the stories that you would find in those little balls if you were to fish them that people picked up. So I just wanted to create these classified ads and then put them up, and it was really interesting just to see people outside interested in reading them and kind of understanding that they're a little off, or at first wondering if the place had closed too, which was really fascinating. So just engaging the space of the gallery in a completely different way.
And then on the inside, kind of talking about these surfaces that are constantly being slapped on, one on top of the other, in this area, I guess, and this kind of architecture too. You know, it's almost like those condos that go up in 48 hours and they have all of these artificial kind of surfaces. So I took wood grain contact paper and I made a faux parquet floor, and I used mahogany grain so that the red would really stand out. So this is a view from the inside. Here's another one. The image is a little dark, but so you can kind of see the play with the faux floor and the newspaper. Here's a couple close-ups of the newspaper.
What was interesting about this collaboration too is that I think it, after having done the first one, and this one we took, it was a little more serious, a little more involved, and I think both of our interests in making people aware of things that they might have overlooked or upsetting people's expectations or disrupting fields of experience became this thing that we started to play with. So it was so fun to watch people walk through the gallery and just immediately not know what to do. Like they didn't, because they were expecting to see things on the wall, or they were expecting, so they just didn't know where to place themselves physically. So they started kind of looking around and sort of noticing maybe the floor is different, and then they start to congregate around the windows because it's something like content they could read. So that was really curious.
And here's the floor. That's so that was the floor that was there before. You can see going down the stairs. This kind of confusion. We're at like 6:33. I don't know if we should run through to the MAP, but
let's go to the MAP.
This kind of confusion to just jar, the viewer out of, I guess, going through space both physically and mentally in your usual path, almost with your blinders on, is what we both try to do. I think, Natasha more intellectually and me maybe more physically or viscerally at first.
Which is something we are interested in our collaborations too, where I have a tendency to have a lot of information and Jen is more minimal and sometimes more experiential, you might say. So that's been an interesting thing that I think feeds into this exhibition that we recently had at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. It's the Minnesota Artist Exhibition Program. We collaborated with each other in addition to a third artist who he's a performance artist. He likes to call it behavioral art. His name is Marcus Young, and so he won't be able to speak about this, but for this project, the three of us were really interested in the actual space of the museum and what it symbolizes and how it's understood by the audience and also by the people who work there. Just because Marcus and I do a lot of things in the street and out in the world, and Jen does these interventions in site. So the museum space was really overwhelming for us. We're just like, how are we going to tackle this space? It's the quintessential white wall space. So
there are also so many systems and mechanisms.
Right.
I mean, the theme was semblances, so we were interested underneath that with these invisible mechanisms within the museum, whether it be the space between paintings in the gallery or the quality of light in the gallery, how you move through space, those kinds of decisions, whether it's all of the support staff, whether it's all of the policies, whether it's the storytelling, the authority of the museum, how they create history. There are just all of these layers to your experience in the museum that we all could kind of address from our different perspectives.
Yeah, so the project that I worked on was I invented a fictional artist named Jan Zeilander who works out in the woods and is sort of cut off from society, but he sells his work on eBay, which is sort of a contradiction. And what I did is I invented 10 years worth of exhibition posters for his shows that would kind of tell the story of the artist with artifacts. I have, his hat and brushes and some ephemera and things like that. And, it was interesting because I'm really interested in how culturally we really stand behind stories that shape our values. And, those are things that it's great to have these collective experiences, but sometimes we clash with them individually, or sometimes it's important to question, if we're just going to believe something because we were taught to believe in something. Or in the art world, I know for myself, being a community artists are often looked at as, almost like not as important as gallery artists if you're in like the capital A art world. And so for me, this was a little bit of a response to that too. It's like, what do we value in contemporary art? And so to invent a fiction and to have this artist kind of go through his own personal struggles was really interesting for me. He has a issue with rabbits. There's stories. There's all these little stories, so I had a lot of props like plants and woods and things. And then portraiture for the artist was really important. I had 3 different models. I ended up only using 2 for the posters of him. So even this idea of the man himself is completely overshadowed by the myth of the artist and his work, and so you just really can't locate him, and you really don't know what he does, but there's this production that's going on, so.
Yeah, and I also wanted to add in terms of how this came about in our overarching theme of collaboration here in the talk. It took us a year and a half of discussing this project to be able to submit our proposal, because the way the program works is you submit a proposal to the panel and they say yay or nay, and then they try to schedule you about a year out. So all in all, this project took 2.5 years. And that was another thing, when we were talking earlier about our collaboration strategies with each other, we're both really, like Natasha was saying, kind of reactionary, both to the site, the space that we're working in, or whatever the theme is that we're working with, and also each other. So,
and I would say with that, really flexible. Like we're not shy to be like, no, I'm not into that. But we're very open to what happens within our conversations, and then when we put our pieces together, and just sitting back and going, oh, it's a learning moment. Like this is something new that we didn't expect, and
and you can't
riffing
be
off
precious,
of that.
or you have to kind of check your ego at the door when you start working that way.
However,
so I think bringing that third person into the mix, as much as we love him and we love what happened, because in the end he ended up doing this performance where he installed himself quite literally in the museum. He lived there for 10 days and was really examining what the museum space meant and his relationship to it, and the viewer's relationship to art and the viewer's relationship to the museum. So I think we had a profound effect on him, although our working styles were so different that it took us a year and a half of going around in circles to end up there.
Which Jen and I think one of the important things just to bring about, again, going back to collaboration, is Jen and I realized that flexibility is good, but when you bring that third person in, everyone has a really different working style and temperament. You really have to, I think we discovered our parameters, like, these are the things we value that are important to us, and how do we make sure that everyone's needs are accommodated. And Marcus was, he has a director background, so he would be very like, this is what we're going to do. And I think that, for us, it gave us an opportunity to maybe be more vocal. I think he taught us to be more vocal about
to think what you
we
can
cared about.
give up, or negotiate or compromise on, and what you can't compromise on. So that was a learning experience. And then just quickly, I'll go through some images from my room, because the MAEP space is actually 2 galleries side by side. And so I was dealing with the kinds of things that I mentioned before about the different kind of invisible mechanisms of the museum. I'm interested in your expectations of the museum when you walk through the space, even from gallery to gallery. For example, in the MAEP space, like, how does one encounter that space? Like, what assumptions do you have knowing that it's Minnesota artists showing there versus, this is a museum like the Art Institute here that has like ancient Chinese collection, all the way through a contemporary collection. And so what does it mean when you walk into a certain space? What do you expect of the work and of yourself? And so next to my gallery was 10 points of high point printmaking. And so I was interested in using that gallery space, the setup, as the catalyst, kind of like the structural catalyst for my exhibition. So this was kind of the main giveaway. I made this panel, which they have the same panel in the same place on the other side, but it's in reverse. Mine is in reverse color, and it's the mirror kind of image. And so here you can see it in their gallery, the printmaking galleries on the right here. And so, for example, they had 2 large prints framed on that wall closest to the left. That's what I'm trying to say, to the left. And so I use these scroll boxes. So I'm interested in modes of display and how, I guess mediation for me is a big term. Mediation of the experience, whether it means like the physical mediation of the barrier between you and the work being the display case, the scroll box, the frame, especially, which is like the most prevalent one, I think, if you go in any kind of art space, to, more subtle ways that the experience is mediated for you, from the lighting to the flow of the space to the kind of labels that are up there. And all of the things, the experiences that you've had leading up to this that kind of set you up for how you look at something. And so, like Natasha was saying before, she deals often with an excess of information that, you have to kind of pare down to its essence, and I deal with a seeming absence of information, so I like to play with emptiness, but to slow you down. So she deals with a lot of information to slow you down, and I deal with emptiness to slow you down and to get you really present in the moment, to really see what it is that you're looking at and not just go through the motions of seeing what you're looking at. So, on their side, they have these two baffles, which are the big walls, and they have an education room and then a fire kind of escape. So I just kind of played off of that by making very faint gray painted rectangles. And this is a video that looks like a still image of the wall just adjacent to my wall in the Prince Gallery. So you can see the work that's on that wall. So I'm interested in also making a bridge between, what you see in the gallery museum and what happens in the outside world. Because so much of our experiences is mediated through television, the computer, Google, technology. So we're so used to thinking we're having a real experience with the flat image, and it's not even a flat image. I mean, it's nothing. It's light on, on a screen. So these like material and immaterial moments. I'll just kind of run through these. So this is an outline of some of the prints on the other side. The empty case. The empty labels. And just quickly, I have two photos that are opposite the video of the wall space in between the prints on the other side, and they're placed exactly where the empty wall space would be there. So I don't know how many of you have walked through the gallery here yet, but maybe we can say a couple concluding things.
Yeah. This collaboration I think it'll be a little harder for us to speak to as succinctly, because it's, I think we need some time to reflect on it. But, we were interested I'm still making posters now based on fictions. This is something I'm really going with. Jen and I thought it would be really interesting to see what would happen if we put those, rather than have separate rooms and be working on similar themes, what would happen if we put those works together. And so a thing that comes up in our conversations a lot is this idea of atmosphere. And Jen had noted earlier that I have this intellectual response where, I think of it as a story or an emotive frame, and she works in this sensory way. And we thought, I'm really interested in the sensory and how that could be more invoked in my prints. And Jen has mentioned this interest in the narrative.
We both address both, but yours maybe starts like
it starts that way, and
then
cerebral
goes,
way,
and we go the opposite directions. Yeah,
it's getting hard, see. So this story, the story that I'm working from is a group of people who own mom and pop stores on Glenwood Avenue, Minneapolis. This is during the 60s where the economy is really beginning to shift and change, and they're losing their business. And they wanted to create an old town. I just love this idea too, ideas of like, we'll create an old town. It's not an old town, but we'll create this fiction of an older part of town and get the cobblestone and the lamps and everything. And they proposed it to the city, and they went for it. And you'll see this poster to the right is an actual document of a ribbon cutting event where they had a ribbon cutting for the idea. It's not even, they're not even opening the old town. So there was a barbershop quartet, there were clowns, there were all the, they had this big celebration, and then it never came to fruition because the city took the area by eminent domain and built a Third Avenue distributor, a thoroughfare going right through that area. So they lost their business. Well, they shifted. Some of them still have their businesses open in other areas. But I'm really fascinated with this idea of gathering around idea, and I wanted these. So what I'm doing now is creating commemorative posters that I would like to continue making after this exhibition that commemorates an actual event, mixing fact and fiction, to have a larger dialogue about, how do we deal with this notion of progress on an individual level or on a smaller level? What's the power of belief or personal agency when you get together in your community? I really want to just underline working with Jen has been great to allow me to be a little more abstract and poetic again, because I think with my social justice work, there's really distinct outcomes, learning outcomes, and political outcomes that, and now I am, I'm really interested in how this is changing the way I even work in community projects, because people need that, people need abstraction, people need poetry, people, these are difficult spaces that we're inhabiting. So, yeah, and then, do you want to talk about the videos in relation?
Yeah, just quickly, the videos, like I was saying earlier, working with video is new to me, but I always take my own footage. So for this project, I took advantage of this story that Natasha was interested in and used it as an opportunity to, think about narrative. And because usually, for me, there's not such a distinct narrative, and I also don't really use imagery that's, representational, and I haven't used, sound that's familiar. And so you can kind of read in our statement a little bit more how we were using those strategies. But so I took all the video from YouTube. I just stole it from YouTube. And I was thinking about how, what kinds of animals and insects, might both naturally do things, have habitats, have rituals that mirror some of the things that, we're kind of talking about in this kind of like social realm and in history and in our environment. But then they're also symbols for things that we kind of like project our own ideas onto. And then the sound is from stock sound that I got from, from the filmmakers' CDs in the library. And so I was interested in the confusion and, trying to force an association, and then also the confusion, so you kind of question the kinds of associations that you're trying to make between these kind of familiar images and the familiar sounds. And then I guess, I don't know. For the rest, I feel like, for the future, I'm interested in working on the same thing together, because I think what was funny was, maybe this is just my last little quip here, but when we came together after we started working on our individual pieces, we realized, oh, you're using birds and I'm using birds, like you're using spiders and I'm using spiders. So we hadn't even discussed it, but we were using the same imagery. So that was kind of funny. So it would,
And then, and I think it's important to note, just maybe that's the final note, that when we were in the gallery, and I actually, when I was in school, one of my teachers who works on site-specific work and installation, she always said that she would have to install a piece twice in order to really get it and get what it could be. And this, we're excited about this installation, but out of this, we're getting a lot of ideas, like when we've had time to just step back from the installation, just seeing how the videos are reacting. And it could be an issue about time, like mine have a sense of being an archive, where Jen's seem to be more, they're an archive too, it's a documentary, but it's maybe more present because of emotion. There's a lot of really interesting things that are happening that if we were to show this again, we would probably build on it. So, you're always learning from, it doesn't stop in school. It's every show, every collaboration and experience, you're really opening new doors that you have to be open to. Otherwise, you get stale. Okay, that's it. That's it.
Do you guys have any questions?
Yeah.
Sorry if we're,
we went over a little
talking really quickly, trying to fit everything in. Come on.
Come on, we know you have questions.
Travis.
Hey, Joy.
Hi.
You mentioned earlier that you were somewhat reactionary
Uh-huh.
space. My take on it is space. Either the installation or your approach to that space accordingly. The reactionary idea of it, though, connotes a certain passivity that is, I don't know, by some perception perhaps a negative thing. I wouldn't want to be a passive observer necessarily. How do you avoid that, or do you?
You mean in terms of our working style?
In terms of engaging your audience or whoever may be visiting in your style, in your content, or just in your thought process in the creation of it.
Can I answer first? That's a good question, and we have actually talked about that, I think especially in the MAP talk that we had a couple months ago. And both of us are really interested in giving tools to the viewer to empower them. And I think when we were talking about being reactionary, it's kind of more within like our own studio practice and our dealings with each other.
Or maybe perhaps reactionary is not the best word. Maybe it's responsive. You know, it's a dialogue. It's a dialogical exchange that we're having. That we're bouncing things back, and nothing's really formed or concrete. But yeah, we have talked about audience, and for the MAEP show, I had a real concern. People came in, and I would come in occasionally, and people would be telling their friend, well, this is a famous artist, and they would tell a story about Jan because they believed he was real. And I felt a little bad about that, like I'm pulling the wool over people's eyes or something. But that, for me, that, when they realized that he was a fiction, I think there is something effective about, making you then question and want to go back and look at those images. And then there's other people that, there's a story, there's no real information in that about his work, so you really have to kind of throw yourself into the images. And what I hope it would do is, not be a project that's easy to place within a certain ideology of working. Like, it's not easily recognizable, it's really story-based. So I think in that way it engages. I had a lot of people invent their own stories of like, oh, well, Jan is this. I mean, they would glean their own information and tell people who they thought he was. So that, yeah.
And I think too, like just using that project as an example again, we decided not to have a gallery guide. There was an essay written that ended up being online, but it wasn't available until after our talk even. It wasn't even at the opening. And a lot of our motivation was that we didn't want to spoon feed anybody exactly what it was and what to think. And so, we even had colleagues come in and they're like, where's the gallery guide? I want to know what this is about. And we were like, we're giving you all of this information so that you can come to your own conclusion. And not everybody who comes to see the work is going to get every single reference. They're not going to get every single thing that we were necessarily thinking about. But that's okay. Like, we're trying to give people tools to empower them to think for things themselves, to take the time, to think for themselves instead of just go from label to label to label, and not have to think about what it is that they're reading, and not have to make up their own decisions.
Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
This is maybe a question for you, Jen, and I don't know if the show's so recent, you might not know yet, but it seems the first of what we've seen where the work wasn't tailored to the space.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of all the information in the ceiling right now, cords and cables in that space, that hard space. What is your satisfaction level with the exhibition by putting really pieces in the exhibition versus, I mean, you're transforming the space, you're designing the exhibition space, but it's a different interaction.
It is really different, and I'm not sure if I can speak very articulately about that quite yet, but I think I was interested in trying something different, just in terms of the content of the work and the display strategies for the work. I think some things that are interesting for me about the way that the show is, is installed, is hung, is that, Natasha put the prints straight onto the wall, and then the projections are straight onto the wall. So I think in some ways, I can't quite put my finger on it yet, I'm like interested in digging into other strategies for me to like address other types of work or display strategies in the gallery, the museum. I'm not totally sure. The another part that's just like plain I don't know, like logistics is often like the work that deals with like the nitty-gritty of the actualities, like the physical space, are places that I can go to often. And so, you know, I'd seen pictures and I came down to visit in mid-November. So for me personally, I'm not yet there where I can really design something for the space specifically without having an intimate understanding of it. So it's kind of two things that happened. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody
Other
else?
questions?
The museum show with Jan Zeilander, is that his last name? It's such a cool name. So those pieces were intended to kind of like function together, right? Like your sort of like invisible or like see-through kind of exhibition and your sort of like imaginary history or something like that.
I guess to articulate it a bit better, I mean, yeah, I think we have shown you today sort of a variety of different collaborations that we've made with different objectives. And that one, I think this notion, again, the theme of semblances is really what united all of the projects. So it's not a collaboration in that Jen's how she treated the room and my posters need to live together. You know, I intend on continuing to show that piece, actually in other museum or library kinds of settings. But I think the process of ideation and coming up to that realization of how are we interacting and responding to sight and how we're going to touch on it from different angles, and then what does it mean, you know, what kind of conversation can be in between those rooms and with Marcus's work, which I think in a way leads to what's happening in this room, like what is the conversation between. So it's an odd collaboration. It's not that we're literally making things together.
Like struggled with using that word too, and we can't figure out another word to come up with, like in terms of like, I mean, we've collaborated conceptually,
Took all this sort of preparation and discussion and figure out.
Yeah.
It seems sort of like there is kind of a logical sort of
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely a conceptual one. However, when we were talking with Marcus, we touched on a number of times, you know, should we make the work together? And it was, I think, because of the prestige of this space and it being the first time the three of us had worked together, we really thought it would be too much. And, you know, I'd be curious to see, you know, if we were to give this talk again a couple years from now, what kind of collaborations Jen and I might do, because we're already starting to talk about, you know, the potential of co-creating. So, like, maybe we've worked up to that point where we can see actually making things together, you know. So, if that answers your question. So, we're having issues with terminology today. Reactive collaboration. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Any other questions? Do you have a question? No.
Well, okay. I got with like this collaboration idea, do you ever have people that like will come up to you, like how you said you didn't want to give a summary of like what was actually happening in the gallery? Do you ever have like people contact you about Jan, like who is this guy? Or like, I don't know, how far would you let them take it, like not knowing if it was real or fake?
You know, that's a really good question. That I feel in a way I'm still, you know, because now I'm applying to some other exhibition sites, and one thing I would really like to do is start to give performances where I'm the curator of the Jan Zeilander collection of work, and that I talk about his work. So I'm interested in that, and I'm interested in, you know, I'm interested in Wikipedia, posting Wikipedia things and stuff. So yeah, so I would like to continue the fiction, because I think there's a lot of potential in giving people a place where they can really imagine, and and this is just a purely personal thought, but I feel like today in the art world, it might be a product of academia, but I just feel like we're so quick to package and explain and create a whole an essay or something that package the work so that it's immediately part of the discourse and we all get it, and that's a bit problematic for me. I think art is this living, breathing thing, and if you're risk taking and pushing levels, maybe it shouldn't all be so clear. So I just loved that particular project, and these fictions really invite such a variety of responses, and not in a way that's generic, I guess. It's So yeah, so I would like to push it. I would love to do some performance, like be a curator. I thought that would be really interesting. So I'd have to work up to it. Yeah. So thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening to us. Okay.
Well, thank you both.
Thanks.
Please take time to walk through the gallery, and they'll be walking around. So.
And please, if you have questions.
Yeah.